The Chronos Lens, Chapter 1. A fleeting glimpse of the past. The Saturday morning sun, filtered through the sprawling oak trees, dappled the chaotic landscape of the Portland flea market. Eleanor Vance, now firmly settled into her life at Pinecroft in the Catskills, was visiting her daughter Clara in Oregon. While Clara caught up on errands, Eleanor indulged her lifelong passion for antiques, particularly those with a story. She loved the thrill of the hunt, the silent narratives hidden in dusty objects. Her gaze drifted past rows of chipped pottery and tarnished silverware, past vintage clothing and forgotten toys, then nestled amidst a pile of worn leather-bound books. Something caught her eye. It was an old camera, its brass fittings gleaming dully under a thin layer of dust. Not a modern digital marvel, nor even a common 35mm. This was an antique, a large-format camera, with a collapsible bellows and a majestic lens. Likely from the early 20th century, it looked like a relic from a bygone era, a silent witness to countless forgotten moments. Eleanor, a connoisseur of forgotten narratives, felt an immediate pull. This wasn't just a camera, it was a time capsule. She carefully picked it up. It felt heavy, solid, imbued with a quiet history. The vendor, a young man with a wispy beard, barely looked up from his phone. $5, lady, as is. $5, a steal. Eleanor knew enough about vintage cameras to recognize its potential value, even as a decorative piece. But it was the feel of it, the subtle hum of its past, that truly captivated her. She paid, clutching her new treasure, already imagining it proudly displayed on her mantelpiece back at Pinecroft. Back at Clara's house, Eleanor cleaned her new acquisition. The dust wiped away easily, revealing the rich, dark wood and the gleaming brass. The bellows expanded smoothly. The lens clicked satisfyingly into place. It was remarkably well preserved. As she tinkered with it, her fingers brushed against a small latch on the side. With a gentle click, a hidden compartment popped open. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined slot, was a single, tightly wound roll of film. Eleanor's heart quickened. Old film. What forgotten images might lie within? Landscapes? Portraits of strangers from a century ago? The possibilities thrilled her. She carefully extracted the roll, marveling at its age. It was a large-format film, likely 120mm, common for that era. She knew a specialized photo lab downtown that still processed antique film. The next day, she took the roll there, explaining its origins. The technician, a young woman with vibrant blue hair and a passion for photographic history, was equally excited. "We'll do our best, ma'am. Old film can be tricky. It might be fogged or completely blank, but we'll give it a shot." A week later, a call from the lab. "Your film is ready, Ms. Vance, and you're not going to believe what we found." The technician's voice held a note of genuine awe. Eleanor rushed to the lab. The young woman greeted her with a wide, almost bewildered smile. "Here you go," she said, handing Eleanor a thick envelope. "We developed 5 frames. The rest were too degraded. But these are extraordinary." Eleanor pulled out the first print. It was a sepia-toned photograph, slightly grainy, but astonishingly clear. It showed a vibrant, sun-drenched street scene. Children playing, adults bustling, horses and buggies clattering along a cobbled road. It was undeniably a snapshot from the early 20th century, a perfectly preserved glimpse of a forgotten past. Then she pulled out the second. Her breath hitched. It was a family picnic. A woman, her face partially obscured by the shade of a large oak tree, was smiling. And beside her, a young girl, no older than 5 or 6, with bright, curious eyes and a cascade of dark, curly hair. Eleanor's hand trembled. The girl, the curls, the eyes, they were eerily familiar. She flipped to the third photo, a child's birthday party. The same little girl, blowing out candles on a cake, surrounded by other children. Her profile was unmistakable. Then the fourth, the little girl holding a rag doll, sitting on a porch swing. And the fifth, the girl playing in a lush garden amidst a riot of blooming flowers. Eleanor's vision blurred. The little girl in the photographs, she was unmistakably Evelyn. Her own face, her own childhood features, staring back at her from a photograph taken over a century ago. But how? How could that be possible? She was born in 1957. These photos were clearly taken decades before her birth. The clothing, the setting, the camera itself, it all pointed to a bygone era, certainly pre-1950. The car parked on the street in one of the background shots, a vintage Model T, confirmed it. These photos were from the 1920s, perhaps early 30s at the latest. Eleanor stared at the prints, her mind reeling. This wasn't a historical curiosity anymore. This was impossible. A photograph of her own childhood, taken before she was even a flicker in time. The old camera, the Chronos Lens, had given her a fleeting, impossible glimpse of a past that somehow, inexplicably, contained her own image. The true mystery of the camera and of her own origins had just begun. Chapter 2: The Eerie Familiarity. Eleanor clutched the photographs, her mind a maelstrom of disbelief and a chilling sense of the uncanny. The technician, noticing Eleanor's stunned silence, offered a gentle, slightly bewildered smile. "Amazing, aren't they? Such clarity for film that old. Looks like someone's family album from way back." "Yes," Eleanor managed, her voice strained. "Amazing." She paid, her hands still trembling, and practically fled the lab. She needed to be alone to process this impossible revelation. Back at Clara's house, she spread the 5 photographs across the dining table. The first one, the street scene, she set aside. Her focus was entirely on the other 4, the ones that depicted her own childhood. She studied them with a forensic intensity, her historian's eye now turned inward, dissecting every detail. The curly dark hair, the curious eyes, the small, almost imperceptible dimple on the left cheek when the girl smiled. It was her, undeniably. Yet, the context screamed a different timeline. The clothes, simple, cotton dresses with Peter Pan collars, clearly from the 1920s or early 30s. The toys, a wooden pull toy, a rag doll. The cars in the background of the outdoor shots, Model Ts and early Ford As. The architecture, a small, clapboard house, typical of rural American towns of that era. This was not the suburban California of her own 1960s childhood. Eleanor pulled out her old photo albums from a box she had brought. She found pictures of herself at roughly the same age as the girl in the newly developed photos. The similarities were uncanny, almost identical. But her own childhood photos showed brightly colored clothes, plastic toys, and her parents, Clara and Arthur Vance, who were born in the late 1920s. These new photos showed a different woman, her face obscured by shadow, and a different man, tall and slender, whose face was never fully visible. "This is impossible," Eleanor whispered, running a hand through her silver hair. Her scholarly mind rebelled against the notion of time travel or a photographic anomaly. There had to be a logical explanation, however improbable it seemed. A lookalike, a forgotten distant relative. But the resemblance was too perfect, too intimate to be merely a coincidence. She decided to revisit the first photo, the street scene. She peered closely at the buildings in the background, trying to discern any identifying features. A general store with a faded sign, a blacksmith shop, a small brick post office. Nothing immediately recognizable. But the overall feel, the quiet small-town atmosphere, resonated with descriptions of Cedar Creek, Ohio, her birthplace, in its early days. Could this be Cedar Creek? Eleanor felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. Cedar Creek. The town that held the secrets of Pinecroft. The town where she had just uncovered a century-old mystery of a hidden child, a stolen life. Could this new mystery, this impossible photograph, ever the pragmatist, was intrigued, but skeptical. It's probably a remarkable resemblance, or a very elaborate hoax. They would delve into Eleanor's family history, not just her immediate lineage, but deeper, further back, into the roots of the Vance family in Ohio. The eerie familiarity of the photographs, the impossible connection to her own childhood, had ignited a new, profound quest. The Chronos Lens had opened a door to a past that defied all logic, a past that held a deeply personal secret. And Eleanor knew, with chilling certainty, that her own identity might be inextricably linked to the forgotten history captured by that old camera. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Vance lineage. The next few weeks were a blur of intense genealogical research. Eleanor and Clara, armed with the impossible photographs, delved into the Vance family history with a new, frantic urgency. They started with Eleanor's parents, Arthur and Catherine Vance, and worked backwards, through census records, birth and death certificates, marriage licenses, and old property deeds. Eleanor's father, Arthur Vance, was born in 1927 in Cedar Creek, Ohio. Her mother, Catherine Vance, née Hayes, was born in 1928, also in Cedar Creek. Both their families had deep roots in the town, extending back to the late 19th century. They focused on Arthur's side first, as the Vance name was the direct lineage. Arthur's parents were Eleanor's grandparents, Thomas Vance, born 1900, and Mary Vance, née Jenkins, born 1902. They married in Cedar Creek in 1926. This immediately presented a problem. The child in the photographs looked no older than 5 or 6. If Arthur was born in 1927, and the photos were taken in the 1920s or early 30s, the child couldn't be Arthur's sibling, as they would be too young or not yet born, and it certainly couldn't be a child of Thomas and Mary Vance, as they were married in 1926. The timing for the girl in the photos just didn't fit into their established family tree as a direct descendant of Thomas and Mary. Eleanor felt a growing frustration. The resemblance was undeniable, yet the established lineage provided no explanation. Was it truly just an extraordinary doppelganger? But her gut screamed otherwise. They turned their attention to the Hayes side. Eleanor's mother's family. Could the girl in the photos be her grandmother, Evelyn Hayes, as a child? They found a birth certificate for Evelyn Hayes, born June 15, 1921, in Cedar Creek, Ohio. Eleanor felt a dizzying rush. Born in 1921. If the photos were taken between 1925 and 1927, when the girl would be 4 to 6 years old, that would fit the visual evidence of the vintage clothing and cars perfectly. The pieces were finally starting to align. The child in the photograph was her maternal grandmother, Evelyn Hayes, who she had never known. Her grandmother had died tragically young in a car accident in 1945, when Eleanor's mother, Catherine, was only 17. Eleanor had only ever seen a few formal, posed photographs of her grandmother, always as an adult, often looking serious and melancholic. She had never seen pictures of her as a child. Eleanor pulled out one of the old formal photos of her grandmother, Evelyn Hayes, as an adult. She compared it to the child in the vintage photographs. The eyes, the distinct shape of the mouth, the proud set of the jaw, even in a young child, the resemblance was striking. It was Evelyn Hayes, her grandmother, as a little girl. A wave of profound emotion washed over Eleanor. The impossible had a logical, if deeply poignant, explanation. The camera had captured her own grandmother's childhood, a past she had never known, a connection to a maternal lineage that felt both familiar and strangely alien. But the mystery wasn't fully solved. Why had her family never seen these photographs? Why were they hidden inside a camera from a flea market, instead of cherished in a family album? Why did her grandmother, Evelyn Hayes, seem so sad in her adult photos? A sadness that wasn't present in the joyful childhood images. And who was the woman whose face was always obscure in the photos, the woman who seemed to be her grandmother's mother? Eleanor felt a new, urgent need to understand the life of her grandmother, Evelyn Hayes. She had only known her as a name on a faded family tree, a tragic footnote in her mother's childhood. Now, she was a vibrant, smiling little girl in an impossible photograph, holding a secret that still lingered in the silent echoes of the past. The Chronos Lens had not shown her her childhood, but the lost childhood of her namesake, Evelyn Hayes, unraveling a personal history far more complex and heartbreaking than she could have ever imagined. The echoes in the Vance lineage were growing louder, revealing a deep, forgotten narrative. Chapter 4. The Unseen Mother. Eleanor was now consumed by the life of her maternal grandmother, Evelyn Hayes. The young, joyful girl in the old photographs was a stark contrast to the melancholic adult her mother, Catherine, had described. There was a story here, a hidden narrative behind the beaming smile of the child and the quiet sadness of the woman she became. Her primary focus was on the adult woman in the photographs, the one whose face was always obscured by shadow or angle. This was her great-grandmother, Evelyn Hayes's mother. Her name, according to the genealogical records, was Evelyn Croft Hayes, born in 1900. Eleanor and Clara delved into the life of Evelyn Croft Hayes. They found her marriage certificate to George Hayes in 1925. They found her birth record. But after 1928, when her daughter Catherine, Eleanor's mother, was born, the records became sparse. There was no death certificate for Evelyn Croft Hayes in Cedar Creek, no record of her moving away. She simply seemed to disappear from the official narrative. This was a red flag. A woman, a mother of 2 young children, doesn't simply vanish without a trace, especially not in a small town like Cedar Creek, where everyone knew everyone. This implied a deeper secret, a deliberate erasure. Eleanor visited the Cedar Creek Historical Society, a small, privately run organization separate from the library. The curator, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, no relation to Martha, but just as much a repository of local lore, was a treasure trove of information. Evelyn Croft Hayes, Mrs. Henderson mused, her eyes twinkling. Oh yes, the beautiful Evelyn. A real tragic story, that one. Folks don't talk about it much. It was quite scandalous at the time. Eleanor leaned forward, her heart pounding. Scandalous? What happened? Well, Mrs. Henderson began, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Evelyn Hayes was a free spirit. Even for her time. She was a talented artist, a painter. She loved to travel, to see the world beyond Cedar Creek. Her husband, George, was a good man, steady, a farmer. But he was a bit traditional. Folks said he didn't quite understand her artistic soul. She paused, adjusting her spectacles. Then came the summer of 1930. A traveling photographer came through town. A charming, worldly man named Arthur Dubois. He was setting up a temporary studio, taking portraits, offering lessons. Evelyn, she was fascinated by photography, loved the new art form. She spent a lot of time with him. Too much time, folks whispered. Eleanor's breath hitched. A photographer, Arthur Dubois, and the camera she found was from that era. And then, Mrs. Henderson continued, Evelyn Croft Hayes, she just left, vanished, without a trace. One morning, her children, young Evelyn and baby Catherine, woke up and she was gone. George, her husband, was devastated. He told everyone she just packed her bags and left, ran off with that photographer, said she was tired of small-town life, of being a mother. Eleanor's blood ran cold. This was eerily similar to Mark's disappearance, a cruel echo of a perceived abandonment. But this was her own great-grandmother. No one ever heard from her again? Eleanor pressed. Not a word, Mrs. Henderson confirmed, shaking her head sadly. George raised the girls himself, with the help of his sisters. He never spoke of her again. It was a dark cloud over the Hayes family. People said she was a bad mother, selfish. But a very few, always wondered. It seems so out of character. She loved those girls fiercely. Eleanor's mind raced. The obscured face in the photographs, the camera, the photographer, Arthur Dubois. Was this camera his camera? Had he given it to Evelyn Croft Hayes? Or was it her camera, used to capture the last moments of her life before her disappearance? Photos of young Evelyn Hayes, so full of joy, now held a new, poignant meaning. They were the last visual records of a happy childhood before her mother vanished, before a dark secret enveloped her family. The Chronos Lens had not just shown her a glimpse of the past. It had revealed a deliberate erasure, a hidden abandonment, and the profound tragedy of her great-grandmother, the unseen mother, whose story was waiting to be told. Eleanor knew she had to find out what truly happened to Evelyn Croft Hayes. The layers of secrets were peeling away, leading her deeper into the complex, heartbreaking tapestry of her own family history. Chapter 5: The Photographer's Legacy. The story of Evelyn Croft Hayes, her great-grandmother, resonated deeply with Eleanor. The perceived abandonment, the silent judgments, it mirrored her own experience with Mark, albeit with a devastating twist of fate within her own family. The key to understanding seemed to lie with Arthur Dubois, the traveling photographer and the mysterious camera. Eleanor and Clara intensified their search for Arthur Dubois. They trawled through historical photographic societies, vintage camera forums, and old newspaper archives for any mention of his name. It was Clara, with her keen research skills, who found the breakthrough. An article in a defunct photography magazine from 1935 profiled a renowned landscape photographer named Arthur Dubois. The article lauded his unique style, his innovative use of early color photography, and his mysterious past. It mentioned that he had started his career as a traveling portrait photographer, moving from small town to small town, documenting rural American life. His Chronos series, capturing the changing seasons and timeless landscapes, was particularly praised. Eleanor's heart leaped. Chronos, the name of the camera, a Greek word for time. Could this be more than a coincidence? The article also mentioned that Dubois had been known to customize his cameras, often inscribing them with personal touches. They found records of Arthur Dubois' travels. He had indeed been in Cedar Creek, Ohio, in the summer of 1930. The timeline perfectly matched the period of Evelyn Croft Hayes' disappearance. Then, they found his obituary from 1972 in a small town in Arizona. He had lived a long, successful life, but died childless, leaving his estate, including his extensive collection of photographic equipment, to a distant relative, a grandniece named Lillian Dubois, who lived in Phoenix. Eleanor contacted Lillian, a spry woman in her 80s, who was delighted to hear from someone interested in her eccentric great-uncle Arthur. Lillian confirmed that Arthur was indeed a gifted photographer, always experimenting with new techniques. She remembered stories of his early days as a traveling photographer. He had a very particular camera, though. Lillian mused over the phone. A large format, custom-made one with a special lens he called the Chronos Lens. He swore it had a way of capturing moments in time, a certain resonance. Eleanor's hand trembled. The camera she bought at the flea market. It was Arthur Dubois' personal camera, the Chronos Lens. The same camera that had captured her grandmother's childhood. Eleanor cautiously broached the topic of Evelyn Croft Hayes. Lillian paused, then her voice grew quieter. Ah, Evelyn Hayes. Yes, my uncle spoke of her, briefly. He said she was a remarkable woman, a true artist, trapped in a life too small for her. He admired her immensely. Lillian then revealed a crucial piece of information. My uncle Arthur, he was not just a photographer. He was also a passionate advocate for women's rights, particularly for women escaping abusive situations. He was quietly involved in a small, informal network that helped women disappear, relocate, and start new lives when they were trapped. He believed every woman deserved freedom and a chance to escape a life that might literally kill them. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Abusive situations? Yes, Lillian confirmed. He never spoke of specifics, but he implied Evelyn Hayes was in one. He said her husband, George, was a good man in public, but a very controlling, often volatile man in private. He didn't like Evelyn's artistic ambitions, her independence. He became jealous, possessive, especially when she spent time with Arthur learning photography. Uncle Arthur said he saw signs of escalating anger, of a woman trapped and terrified. Eleanor gasped. Her great-grandfather, George Hayes, the steady, good man from Cedar Creek, was not who he seemed. The apparent abandonment of Evelyn Croft Hayes wasn't an abandonment at all. It was an escape, an orchestrated disappearance designed to save her life. Arthur helped her? Eleanor asked. Her voice filled with a mixture of horror and profound understanding. He never said it directly, Lillian replied, but I always understood that he helped her disappear. He knew the risks. He helped her get a new identity, a new life, far away from Cedar Creek. He said she was desperate to protect her children from her husband's darkness, to break the cycle. She knew she couldn't take them without risking her own life and perhaps theirs. She believed by disappearing, she was giving them a chance at a safer, albeit motherless, life. The Chronos Lens had captured the last joyful moments of Evelyn Hayes's childhood, before her mother, Evelyn Croft Hayes, made the ultimate sacrifice, choosing to disappear to save her children from a hidden domestic terror. The photographer, Arthur Dubois, was not a seducer, but a rescuer, a silent hero. And the camera, his Chronos Lens, wasn't just capturing the past. It was whispering a deeply personal, hidden narrative of sacrifice and survival. The mystery of the unseen mother was finally revealed, painting a tragic yet courageous portrait of Evelyn Croft Hayes. Eleanor knew she had to find out what happened to her great-grandmother. Chapter 6: The Unveiling of Evelyn Croft Hayes. The revelation about George Hayes's abusive nature and Evelyn Croft Hayes's orchestrated disappearance profoundly shifted Eleanor's understanding of her family history. The narrative of abandonment was replaced by one of courage and sacrifice. Her great-grandmother hadn't been selfish. She had been a protector, making an impossible choice to save her children from a hidden danger. Eleanor felt an urgent need to know what happened to Evelyn Croft Hayes after she disappeared. Arthur Dubois had helped her, given her a new life. But where, and did she ever find peace? Armed with the knowledge of Arthur Dubois' network and his meticulous record-keeping, Eleanor and Clara focused their search on women who had disappeared from rural Ohio around 1930 and reappeared under new identities in other states, particularly in areas known for supporting independent artists or women's collectives. It was a painstaking, needle-in-a-haystack search, but Eleanor's academic rigor combined with Clara's tech savvy proved invaluable. After weeks of cross-referencing obscure public records, art exhibition catalogs, and historical societal memberships, they found a promising lead. A woman named Eleanor Croft, an accomplished landscape painter, had settled in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In 1931, she was known for her vibrant, almost ethereal depictions of desert landscapes. Her biography mentioned a mysterious past, having arrived from the East with little but her talent and a profound desire for a new beginning. Eleanor's heart pounded. Eleanor Croft. Her great-grandmother's maiden name was Croft, and she was a painter. It was too much of a coincidence. They found more records of Eleanor Croft. She had indeed become a respected artist in Santa Fe, teaching art classes, exhibiting her work. She had lived a quiet, solitary life, never marrying, never having more children. She died in 1980 at the age of 80, leaving behind a significant body of work and a small but cherished personal collection. Eleanor and Clara decided they had to go to Santa Fe. They located the gallery that handled Eleanor Croft's estate. The current owner, a warm, elderly woman named Maria, remembered Eleanor Croft fondly. A wonderful artist, but truly spiritual woman, Maria recalled. She always seemed to carry a deep sadness, a quiet strength. Never spoke of her past, but her paintings, they always told stories of both beauty and profound loss. Maria led them to a small, private collection of Eleanor Croft's personal effects, left to the gallery with instructions to sell them only if they could find their way to someone who truly understood. Among them was a small, locked wooden box. She always kept this with her, Maria explained, said it contained her most precious memories, but she never opened it for anyone. Eleanor felt a surge of recognition. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. The key to the box was missing, but Eleanor, with a sudden, inexplicable certainty, pulled a small, ornate brass key from her own keychain, a family heirloom she had always carried, inherited from her grandmother, Evelyn Hayes, passed down to her mother, then to her. It was a key she had always worn, a silent reminder of a forgotten lineage. It was the key to the Chronos Lens, the same key that had unlocked the film compartment. Could it be? With trembling hands, Eleanor inserted the key into the lock of the wooden box. It clicked open with a soft, resonant sound. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were 3 items: a stack of yellowed, small-format photographs. Eleanor carefully picked them up. They were more photos of young Evelyn Hayes, her grandmother, as a child, clearly taken with the Chronos Lens, some showing the obscured face of Evelyn Croft Hayes, others showing her more clearly, smiling gently at her daughter. These were the cherished memories she had held on to. A small, beautifully preserved leather-bound journal. Eleanor opened it. It was Evelyn Croft Hayes's personal journal, detailing her life after leaving Cedar Creek. Page after page, her struggles, her art, her loneliness, and her profound love for her 2 daughters, Evelyn and Catherine, whom she had left behind. She wrote of the daily agony of her choice, the constant fear for their safety if she had stayed, the unwavering belief that her disappearance was the only way to save them. She wrote about her dreams, her art, her desire for freedom, and her constant longing for her children. "Every brushstroke carries a prayer for my girls," she wrote. "Every sunrise is a new day of missing them." And finally, a single, folded, brittle letter. It was addressed to my dearest daughters, Evelyn and Catherine, dated 1978, just 2 years before her death. In it, she confessed everything: the abuse from George, Arthur Dubois' selfless help, her desperate choice to disappear, her belief that it was the only way to break the cycle of violence and ensure her children's safety. She begged for their forgiveness, explained her love, and expressed her hope that they lived lives free of fear and pain. "My dearest girls," the letter concluded, "I was never gone. I was always watching, always loving, always hoping you would understand. My life, my art, was always a testament to my love for you both." Eleanor wept, silent tears streaming down her face. The full truth, unveiled after decades, was heartbreakingly beautiful. Her great-grandmother, the unseen mother, had found freedom, but at a profound personal cost. The Chronos Lens had not just captured her childhood, it had led Eleanor to the complete, courageous story of Evelyn Croft Hayes. The layers of silence were finally broken, revealing a sacrifice of love that transcended time and deception. Eleanor now knew who the little girl in the photograph was, who the unseen mother was, and the profound depth of her own lineage. The reckoning had come, bringing not only understanding, but a deep sense of connection to a past she had never known. Chapter 7: Legacy of the Chronos Lens. Eleanor and Clara left Santa Fe, their hearts heavy with the profound story of Evelyn Croft Hayes, but also filled with a deep sense of peace. The Chronos Lens, which had initially presented an impossible anomaly, had become a key to unlocking a century-old family secret, revealing courage, sacrifice, and enduring love. Back at Pinecroft, Eleanor felt a renewed purpose. She began writing her book, no longer just a scholar documenting history, but a family member bringing a forgotten legacy to light. She meticulously wove together the threads of the Miller family tragedy at Pinecroft and the Hayes family secret, showing how the past, with its hidden sorrows and acts of courage, continued to echo through generations. The Chronos Lens, her catalyst, became a symbolic thread connecting these disparate narratives. She showed the photographs, the midwife's journal, and Evelyn Croft Hayes's journal and letter to her own mother, Catherine. Catherine, now in her late 90s, had always carried the quiet pain of her mother's unexplained disappearance. Seeing the truth, reading her mother's words, brought a flood of tears, but also an overwhelming sense of relief and forgiveness. "She didn't abandon us," Catherine whispered, clutching the faded letter. "She protected us. All these years, I thought. But she loved us. She truly loved us." The healing for Catherine was profound. A lifetime of unanswered questions finally resolved. Eleanor and Clara also contacted the descendants of Arthur Dubois, sharing the true story of his courageous network and his role in helping women escape abusive situations. Lillian Dubois was deeply moved, proud of her great-uncle's hidden humanitarian work. She agreed to help Eleanor establish a fund in Arthur's name, dedicated to helping victims of domestic abuse. The Chronos Lens, the old camera from the flea market, now sat prominently on Eleanor's desk at Pinecroft. It was no longer just an antique. It was a tangible link to the past, a silent storyteller. Eleanor often picked it up, tracing its brass fittings, feeling its weight, knowing it had captured moments that transcended time, revealing truths that had been hidden for decades. She wondered if the camera truly held some mystical quality, a resonance with the past, or if it was simply a powerful symbol of memory and the enduring human desire to uncover hidden narratives. Eleanor's book, tentatively titled The Chronos Lens, Unveiling a Century of Secrets, began to take shape. It was a deeply personal journey, a testament to the power of hidden stories, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring impact of secrets on generations. She found particular solace in the idea that the seemingly impossible photographs were not of her, but of her namesake, Evelyn Hayes, the child who had grown up without her mother, only to have her story and her mother's courage finally revealed by her granddaughter. She continued her research, exploring other missing women from the 1920s and 30s, seeking to uncover more stories of quiet courage and escape. The Chronos Lens had opened her eyes not only to her own family secrets, but to a wider historical narrative of women forced to make impossible choices. The summer faded into autumn, and autumn into winter, blanketing Pinecroft in a pristine white silence. Eleanor, surrounded by her books, her writing, and the quiet comfort of the cottage, felt more at peace than she had ever been. The ghostly whispers of Pinecroft were gone, replaced by the inspiring echoes of resilience and love. The flea market find, a simple old camera, had pulled Eleanor into a labyrinth of family history, uncovering a tragic fire, a stolen twin, an abusive secret, and a courageous mother's sacrifice. It had led her to a deeper understanding of her own identity, not just as a scholar, but as a thread in a rich, complex tapestry of lives. The Chronos Lens had truly lived up to its name, capturing moments that defied linear time, revealing a hidden truth that brought peace and understanding to generations. Eleanor Vance, the woman who had sought solitude, had found something far more profound, a legacy, a purpose, and the knowledge that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find their way to light, bringing with them healing and sometimes even a rediscovered sense of self.